Well, and the thing that you're talking about here is, never using your own stuff to treat somebody. That came out of Blackhawk Down. Tim Wilkinson, really, really famously, he ran around and he was using everybody else's med gear. This was not a standard thing back in October of 1993. This was not a standard thing that they did. And when he got done with that, him and there was another PJ that was on the ground named Scotty Fales. And I've actually had the distinct privilege to talk to both of those guys. They were in the AFSOC community for a long time after Blackhawk Down, working at the North Carolina unit. They probably still are, as far as I know. But they both said the same thing. They got done. And people were asking him about, how did they manage their gear? I think it was Tim Wilkinson looked at everybody, was like, my gear, my med ruck is fully packed. I'm ready to go, baby. And they were like, what are you talking about? He was like, yeah, I didn't use any of my own gear. Yeah. He's like, every time, the Ranger medic, I would steal their ruck. I would go, he's like, that's my gear. I'm not going to use my gear. I'm going to use everybody else's gear first. But that was sort of where the IFAC came from, is that everybody has their own medical gear on them. And I don't treat out of that. Right. So even me, a lifetime ago as a primary medic, when I run up to a patient, if I run up to Peaches and he's hurt, I don't grab it out of my IFAC. I grab it out of my bleeding pocket. There's a way that you load your pants and you load your kit and you have additional bags and stuff. That's for patients. Like I have specific stuff that I treat patients out of, never out of your own IFAC. That's for me. That's my tourniquet. That's my chest seal. That's my dart. That's my breathing device. That's my stuff. That's to save my life. That's for somebody else to save my life if I need it. But that came out of Blackhawk Down. That was one of the lessons learned out of Operation Gothic Serpent, where Tim Wilkinson and Scotty Fales both were like, nah, dog, we're not going to use anybody else's stuff. We're going to use your stuff, not my stuff. Yeah. That was a really good lesson learned.
No, and it you can sit here and go, well, I thought, in SOF you can do whatever you want in terms of wear whatever you want to your kit. That is not the case, man.
No.
We do the same thing with crypto, like in terms of radios. Like it needs to be in a well-known standardized spot so that if somebody needs to like burn the crypto, or not burn it, but destroy the crypto or something like that, or needs to plug their radio because their radio for whatever reason dropped the crypto fill, I need to, if I don't have my own, I need to be able to just reach in, grab it. Because now if we're in a fight, I don't need this. Hey, buddy, where you brother, got this? Hey man.
Brother. Oh, well, I sewed my
Till
own.
Valhalla.
Till Valhalla, brother.
Yeah.
I love it too that people are just like, they have this misconception, and young guys do it on team all the time, right? Like they show up and like it's always great to watch like the older dudes on team. The first like tactical scenario, the first time that everybody's in full kit, they kind of like look at the young guy and they're like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "Oh, that's how I roll, man. I just found out that I like that." But like, "Oh yeah, tight. Go take all of that off and then look like your team leader. Go put your shit together and don't make me talk to you about it again," because that's what it is. Like it's way more standardized than you think. Like we're a little bit better. We don't do like full on gear shakedowns at every single training event. Like you're given a little bit of a leash on that, but we were 100% standardized. Like, hey, here's where you're going to wear your radio. Here's where your crypto is. And to your point, there was a time we were getting ready to go take off, in Afghanistan. So this is 2014, 2015, getting ready to go take off and go do something. And the helicopters dropped their crypto. Like as they were getting ready to go, the helicopters didn't have crypto. That's a no. You can't do that. They're not going to fly.
Can't talk to anybody.
In plain language. Right. Yeah. So then the entire ground team. So our controller had to get off the bird, had to go grab his fill, had to go get over to the bird, had to load the crypto for the birds, or that mission wasn't going. And by the way, the guy that handed him the crypto was his PJ. The guy was just like, "Hey, here you go." Like, the controller, comes over the radio, is like, "Hey, I need my fill device." And he was like, "Oh yeah, cool." Reach right in his ruck, grab it. And he's like, "There's your sensitive item. Like, I know where it is because that's how we do things. That's how things are loaded out." And you know what? If the controller needed to get that PJ, his narcs, later in the mission, guess what? The controller can reach right in the bag. He knows exactly what Pelican case to grab, and he can give that PJ his narcs. That's why we do it, because it makes you better.
It's also why you guys need to know how to program radios too, not just for your own, but a lot of times we'll take care of that. But if I happen to have a large radio in the back of my ruck that I can't get access to, I don't have it remoted into ATAC or a KDU. Like I need you to go back there and I need you to cycle up my channel 3 to channel, 4 or 5 or whatever it is. Because if not, I got to take my ruck off and we're in this tight freaking, helicopter or whatever we're at. It's just, you got to know each other's job, not to the point like I don't need to be a PJ, but I at least need to know some TCCC, some basic stuff, not just scenario wise or education training wise, but I need to know where you have things within your ruck as well. And kind of going back to what we talked about with, Dave Swan, Tim Wilkinson and Gothic Serpent and stuff like that is, where do you think, not you, I know, but like for the folks out there, where do you think these scenarios come from? They come from real world events, things that everybody has experienced, whether Aaron and I have experienced them, whether we've read them in after actions reports, or whether they're kind of famous, events. Mm-hmm. That's how we learn. And some of them could really seem outlandish and bombastic and just like, dude,
you're like, there's no way that, exactly. Some dude, training, there's no way that this could happen.
You think I just came up with this? Like you think that us hanging a pilot off the edge of a cliff and us having to jump into a frozen lake bed and snowshoe all the way up a mountain to then recover that dude off of a cliff, a real person hanging off a cliff. You think that just hasn't happened before and we just came up with that?
We just dreamed it up. Right.
Yeah, I got it. We put people in this car and we crushed it and we covered it with snow. But that's only because I didn't have a helicopter Hulk to then, crash and put snow on and catch it on fire. Like, so yeah, there's some creative licensing that are involved with that. But like, dude, these scenarios happened.
Right. Well, the great part about it too is, students, you always are like, okay, well, there's no way that this happened in real life. I want to say when I was at the schoolhouse, what we would do is, instructors would talk about missions that they've been on. And they'd be like, hey, I was on this mission and this crazy thing happened. And, this is how, we joke about we joke about people acting out or whatever. There was this one scenario that we used to run all the time for the students at Kirtland. We would evaluate them. And, you're just there sitting your regular, I don't think they do it anymore, so I'm not telling you guys any G2 or anything, but you're basically sitting there on alert and a C-47, MH-47 is about to take off. And they take off, and on their takeoff, they experience an engine failure and they crash, and you have like a 20-person mass casualty right out your door. And people are just like, oh, yeah, whatever. That was an actual scenario. Like one of our PJs, Mike, he responded to that exact thing. Like he was sitting alert in Iraq and somebody else was, another 47 was taken off and they just crashed on their takeoff. And suddenly you have this 30-person mass casualty event that's right out your front door. Mm-hmm. And you have to go, respond to that. There was this added wrinkle to it where, one of the instructors would play the fire chief. And as the students were starting to like run the mass casualty, this Air Force fireman would come over and would start like yelling at people and would like be telling the officer to fuck off. And he was like, no, this is my scene and it's on base and it doesn't matter if you guys are PJs, he's going to run the scenario, whatever. And we would get done. And every single time we'd be like, okay, give us feedback on this thing. The crow, the officer in charge would look at us and go, well, it was all pretty realistic except for the fire chief. Like, Sergeant Lawrence pretending to be this guy and whatever. Well, then the instructors would be like, hey, that happened in real life, dude. That was a real wrinkle that I had to deal with during this thing. Like, I know it seems the most ridiculous. Dude, crazy. Well, this is a pretty funny story, but so we were in Bagram in 2000. I think this had to be like 2014. So 2014, no kidding, we get a phone call from a 2-star general, right? So the commander of the base was a 3-star at the time. I want to say an Army 3-star. And then the vice commander was a 2-star general or something. A guy named Kelly, Air Force general named Kelly. So the phone rings and like, no kidding, somebody like calls downstairs like, hey, Aaron, can you come up here? And I'm like, yeah, man, what's up? So I leave our team room and I go up to the talk. And they're like, yeah, the general's on the phone for you. And I was like, oh God, what did the boys do?
Oh boy, here
I'm
we
like,
go.
did we steal something? Did we get in trouble? I was like, I wasn't aware of anything. So I was like, oh, did the boys not tell me? No kidding, this general. So they were digging a trench in order to lay out like communication stuff, right? So they were going to lay out fiber optic cables and stuff. So third country nationals, a bunch of Sudanese dudes, were digging this huge trench, like 15 foot deep, 5 or 6 foot wide trench. Well, there's no OSHA in Afghanistan, and these dudes didn't even speak English. So some of the safety stuff wasn't exactly on par. So the trench collapsed. So the general just happened to be driving by this scenario where there's like on base fire, because at the time Bagram was huge, right? Like, I mean, it was actually drawing down, but this was the time like Bagram had like a TGI Fridays and shit. So just wild. But anyway, so he drives by this scenario, and they've been trying to get this guy out of this hole for like, I don't know, an hour and a half. And finally, the general was like, I know guys that do this. So he calls over and literally just asks us, he's like, hey, can you show up and go help them out? So we showed up to this event, this disaster, sort of response where they had 2 people that were trapped in this trench, and they were trying to figure out, like, they had this big rope system tied up to a fire truck. They were going to like pull the guy out. It was this crazy scenario. But walking into that, like, I'm in a combat zone. I'm in Iraq or in Afghanistan. I've got all of my friends with me. I show up and I'm basically talking to a fireman he was like from Chicago. He just happened to be on his 6-month rotation as a contractor over here. And, Mike Crow and I, like, we just laughed. We looked at each other. I'm like, this is like a 30-minute problem. I was like, we're going to have this thing buttoned up pretty much right away. But it was funny because we walk up to the guy, and there was this back and forth where you had to be like, hey, so listen, you're in charge of the scene. We're just here to help, but we have all this like really specialized extrication equipment, and like their Skedco, they had like generation 1 of that litter that we were talking about earlier, the Skedco. It was bright orange, and it was like 3 times as big as ours. Ooh. I literally take our bag, and it's 75% smaller. I was like, hey, for confined spaces, this actually works better. Do you want me to send maybe my medic down there? And then the guy was in immense pain. His leg was it ended up breaking his femur when it collapsed. It broke his femur, but it put it in such a way he was buried up to his chest. So then he was having breathing problems, and then his leg was angulated in a very unnatural way. Like the way that the earth crushed his leg was pointing in a direction it should not point, right? Oh. So they couldn't figure out how they were going to try to move or dig him out or do whatever. And he was in a lot of pain. And the guy couldn't get anybody on the phone to approve like morphine for the guy. And I was like, you're going to give this dude morphine? I was like, he's already having problems breathing. I was like, how about this? I was like, I don't need to ask anybody. My medic can just go start giving him drugs, and like we can start making this scenario happen. But all that to say, and by the way, we did beat, I will give credit to my Crow, who is no longer in. He's doing good things for a 3-letter agency. But John, my Crow, one of my favorite officers I ever worked for, as soon as I was like, this is a 30-minute problem, he was like, click, okay, you said it. You're on the clock, baby. And I was like, fine, fuck you. We're going to do this. I was like, I'm going to have this scene managed in 30 minutes or less, because that's whatever. But we did beat that 30-minute clock, to his credit. He did a great job too. But it was just one of those things where, to try to explain that to somebody, we would run training events, and I'd be like, oh yeah, you're on alert right now, but you're not going to get into a gunfight. You get a call to your talk, and it's a general asking you to go help the fire department with this confined space scenario in the middle of a war zone. And people were like, that doesn't make any sense. JMac, when JMac was in, I want to say it was Iraq, he had one of the dive missions in Iraq because somebody blew a Humvee, hit an IED, and it blew it into a river. And then they had to go work a dive recovery Swiftwater mission on the side of the freaking Tigris River in Iraq. Like, no kidding, JMac is running a dive site right next to a river for a Humvee. Yeah, dive soup in it. Just crush it. You know what I mean? So that stuff happens. Those stories are out there. And it seems, when we put it in the context of training, there are times where you're like, that would never happen. Man, it happens. The weirdest stuff happens. Sometimes you got to shoot a cow, ask Jared Taylor. Sometimes, who knows, dog?